time now to move forward to the panel. And I would just like to welcome Carolyn Cadman. We're very lucky to have Carolyn to chair the panel discussion. Carolyn is CEO of the Cornwall Wildlife Trust and also Cornwall Environmental Consultants, which is also part of the Wildlife Trust. And she's previously worked with the Marine Management Organisation and Natural England, and then came to Cornwall Council in 2015. And her team manages 55 nature reserves, and they work with 1,400 volunteers per year. And they host the accredited Local Environment Resources Centre for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. And the team deliver a range of marine and land-based conservation projects in partnership with other landowners, farmers, fishermen, and other businesses. And they help businesses to make wildlife-friendly decisions, advocating low carbon and nature-based solutions to the challenge that Cornwall faces. So I can't see Carolyn there, but are you there?
I'm here, Lindsay. Oh, thank you very much. Good to see everyone. Hope you're having a good day. It sounds like you are. I've caught some of the presentations on and off today. So yeah, and including the amazing Cheryl Marriot, who's our head of conservation. So hello Cheryl, give us a wave. I think people can see you. Nice to see lots of familiar faces who are the panellists, and some new faces too. So we've got an amazing panel. We've got Councillor Rob Nolan from Cornwall Council, who's the portfolio holder for the environment. We've got, I think, John Mitchell, although I can't see him, from Cornwall Council, who effectively works for Rob and for us as council taxpayers. I can see Chris Jones from Cornwall Beaver Project. I can see Merlin from Cllr. Hi Merlin, and lots of others as well, some of whom have spoken before and some haven't. So as and when we go through this, we can introduce people. So I'll ask anyone who's answering a question just to make sure that people know who they are. So if all panellists can take responsibility for that, that would be great. So let's go to our first question, which is from Jocelyn Murgatroyd. And Jocelyn, I know Jocelyn's on the call because I can see her listed, but I'm going to do my best to read out her question. And I think, Rob Nolan, this is a question for you, first of all. And I'll do my best here. I might paraphrase a bit, Jocelyn, so forgive me. Cornwall Council's Forest for Cornwall tree planting ambitions are to be applauded. However, the likes of Charlie and Isabella Tree's NEP estate favour a more naturalistic approach to tree spreading, and the survival rates of such saplings appear to be much greater than widespread tree planting. There have even been studies in the likes of the Scottish moorlands that suggest planting trees in previously untouched lands results in less carbon being stored. Given all this, how should Forest for Cornwall and other potential tree planting initiatives proceed in Cornwall to achieve the best of both worlds? And Rob, if you might want to involve some of your team in
I lost most of that, Carolyn.
Answering the question as well.
Lost most of that.
And I'll mute you. I know you've done it.
I'm mute myself. Right, thank you very much.
Oh, sorry. Is there going to be any natural?
No, getting lost at the crucial moment. Let me plough on, and then maybe John will join in after me. We were going quite well with the project, and then COVID came along and people all got whooshed off to do other things. The team is reassembling. We've got a number of vacancies still to fill. We've got people coming into office. So we'll be back in full mode by November and making announcements then of what we're doing. There's some quite exciting announcements coming in that I'm not allowed to tell you about yet. But the Forest for Cornwall is not one big forest, as you know. It's a whole series of small things. So it will be different trees and different approaches in different places. And I'm a very long way from an expert on trees. So I'll have to rely on officers to do that. And for people coming forward, you know, to assist and what suits their area. What we aren't going to do is import any trees. We know that's dangerous because that brings disease. So we're That's about the only thing I'm absolutely certain of, that we're not importing trees. Where we're going to get the trees, as lots of other councils have suddenly thought this is a good idea and started thinking about it, there's likely to be a bit of a shortage. We are looking at an area as a nursery to start, bringing on our own trees in a small area. It's an exciting project. I can't really answer the question because I don't have the expertise. Perhaps John is out there and will give us a bit more, but it's a whole series of small plantings, some quite large. There's one area in Truro, there's potential for 17 acres, which will be quite a big little bit of woodland. But they will all be different. No one size fits all. The conditions around the coast are very different from the conditions in the towns. And we do want to pay attention to urban planting. Get more trees in town. Truro used to be very leafy, and yet everywhere I look now, there's trees being cut down. So it's not just one big forest. It's not even a series of small forests. It's just a lot of trees, and different trees for different places. And perhaps John would like to go a bit more technical if he's there.
Great. I can't see John Mitchell on the call. Can anyone else? Taryn?
No, he's not on the call.
Okay, great. Well, let's move on. The second question that I've got is, isn't protecting mature trees important? Oh, I can see Roxana. Roxana has joined. Let's unmute you.
Yes, hi.
Roxana, there you go. Yeah, do you want to take this? Isn't protecting
Yes, I'm sorry.
Important?
I'm sorry, my network connection is pretty bad. So would you mind repeating the question, please?
Is protecting mature trees important?
Well, absolutely. Well, on behalf of Forest for Cornwall, I would not be able to provide all the answers to that, because it's the forestry team that would be better suited than me to advise you on that, I'm afraid. So I can take the question to the team and come back to you.
Carolyn, Rowe and Conor has their hands.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Let's go to Blen. Blen has her hand up.
No, the panelists.
Sorry, let's go to Alan Rowe. Sorry, Alan, you've got your hand up, and Chris.
Yeah, my name's.
Sorry about this.
My name's Alan Rowe. I'm one of the I'm the tree officer in Cornwall Council Planning Department. So I'm not part of the forestry team on the Forest for Cornwall, but I'm responsible for administering tree preservation orders and planning applications with trees on. Yes, Cornwall Council does have a statutory duty to protect trees under the Town and Country Planning Act. We have recourse to put tree preservation orders on trees to protect existing trees, be they mature or newly planted. We do take that duty seriously, and we do put tree preservation orders on trees. We have 1,600 tree preservation orders in Cornwall. Many of those are large-scale tree preservation orders which individually protect thousands of trees. So those 1,600 TPOs actually protect thousands of trees within the county. So yes, we do understand that protecting what we've got is important. And so we do put tree preservation orders on when we need to. I mean, the Forest for Cornwall is a different initiative, really. I think it's not focusing on protecting what we've got. That's the role for the tree preservation orders.
Great. And Chris, did you want to add to that, Chris Bird?
Yeah, I would like to add to that. I mean, I think it's well known that in terms of a contribution to biodiversity, an oak tree doesn't reach its peak until it's well over 100 years old. So that's why it's so heartbreaking that huge forests of mature trees are being destroyed for things like HS2. So, mature trees have to be up there and not just new forests, because new forests won't really make a major contribution for many, many years.
Great, thank you, Chris.
Like I just say, it's a newly planted tree will take 17 years to start sequestering carbon. So we've got a 17-year lag before we start getting any meaningful carbon sequestration. So yeah, I absolutely agree. Protecting mature trees that are already performing that function is, in my opinion, more important than getting new trees in the ground.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Conor, I think you wanted to come in on that one.
Yeah, Chris does as well. But I was just going to say, it's very obvious just by standing under a mature tree how important they are for us to preserve and to keep as a part of our landscape. There's a really good old farmer's saying that one mature lime is as good as an acre of clover. And the pollen and nectar that one mature lime tree, for example, can create is, you know, it smashes wildflower meadows out of the park. And that, I think a part of that, our love with the meadows and the flowers is because they're on our level. And I think quite often we don't realize the immense work that trees are doing to really engineer our climate and moderate all of these environmental fluctuations that we go through.
Great, thank you, Conor. Chris Jones, I think you had your hand up too. Let's
all good. These are all good points.
Oh.
There's a. Am I unmuted now?
I know.
Okay. Right. I just want to say there's all lovely points coming out. There is a but though, and that is we should always remember unsentimentally that every tree has a lifespan, and that also a lot depends here on what the post-death use of that tree. If it's just going to be for firewood or whatever, well, you know, that's not particularly exciting. But if it's going to be used for construction, if you know, it's an oak tree or a Douglas fir or something that's going to be used in construction, it can sit with its carbon locked up as part of a building for centuries, well surpassing any sort of normal lifespan for a tree. So we really mustn't get sentimental just because it's a bloody pretty tree standing there. Okay, we need to have a lot more trees in our environment, but we need to be looking at this in a very, very measured kind of way. And you know, the TPOs are brilliant, but how many knackered old trees are hanging around with TPOs on them, where they're just quietly emitting more carbon than they're actually sequestering and so on. Let's be really, really clear thinking about this.
Great, thank you, Chris. Now, just scanning over all the different questions that have been sent in, there's quite a few that link to wilding or rewilding, depending on your point of view, and quite a few people on the panel who have some expertise in this area. Yesterday, the Wildlife Trusts called for a new designation of a wild belt to be put forward in the planning reforms that you may have seen in the press. So I'm interested in some views for and against wilding in Cornwall, or maybe not polarising it, maybe not for and against, but different aspects of wilding in Cornwall. And I know many of you will have views. So I'm going to go first to Ian, and then I'll link across to Merlin, and then raise your hand when you've heard from Ian and Merlin if you want to add something to the discussion. Ian.
Okay, this is probably a real dangerous one to get near, to be honest, because even the word rewilding seems to raise people's blood pressure quite enormously. I think what we have to think about is what is it that we want from areas, and is rewilding the best way to get there? And I'm not saying no, and I'm not saying yes. I'm saying that it depends on what area you're looking at, what objectives you want from that area, and that will give you an idea for solutions. I used to work over in East Anglia, okay, and they had a fantastic bird over there called the bittern, and the bittern would not have survived if you had allowed the Norfolk Broads to rewild. The bittern only survived because the area was cut every year. Otherwise, it would have just turned into what's called Cllr woodland. So my concern with the rewilding debate is that it seems very, very black and white. You're either for it or against it. And actually, it depends what you want and what area you're looking at. Hope that helps.
I can see lots of people nodding. Merlin, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Carolyn. So, yeah, for those of you who I don't know on the call, which is probably most people actually, I have an upland hill farm on Bodmin Moor, which is about 330 acres that we're looking to do a range of regenerative farming and rewilding across, and a lot of replanting of woodland, and about 200 acres that we're putting back to oak savanna and hopefully eventually open canopy oak woodland over the next few years. And we have beavers as well, which has been a terrific thing recently. And I completely agree with both Caroline, your points about it being a polarizing topic, and Ian, your points about, it's about what we want to get out of it. And I've been looking really closely at our rewilding aspirations here. And actually for us, what it comes down to is, of course, there will be hopefully great ecosystem benefits and biodiversity benefits, but there has to be a human story as well. And we can't just be taking land out of the rural community and the agricultural economy. Because if we do that, all it will start to do is alienate people. Now, in 1960, when my father started farming here, they employed 8 people full-time on the farm. And then as we've joined the single market and gone through monoculture, various models, we've ended up basically employing less than 1 person full-time on the farm. It's probably about 3/4 of a person full-time. And so the aspiration for our rewilding program is that it will employ more people than farming would. And create better ecosystem restoration benefits as well. So if we can get to a place in a year or two where we're employing 9 people, knowing that therefore we're doing more than even farming was able to do back in 1960 when it was a properly diversified upland hill farm, then that's mission success on the people side. And then if we can also demonstrate that the wildlife has exploded and that the ecosystem is improving, then that's mission success on the environmental side as well. And those two always have to be in balance together, I think.
Great, thanks, Merlin. Cheryl, do you want to add anything from your recent research that you've been doing on the subject in the area?
Thanks, Carolyn. Ian's Bitten example is interesting because I bet there aren't enough natural processes happening over there because there's no beavers. There would have been hippos thousands of years ago, so goodness knows what should really be on those Norfolk Broads doing their thing, because Bittens survived their way back without us there to chop stuff down. I think I'm really excited by rewilding because of the optimism around it and the hope that it brings, and we need a dollop of optimism and hope at the moment. It's not suitable for everywhere. Of course, we've got to keep farming, but our nature reserves in Cornwall, the areas put over to nature at the moment, aren't enough because species are still going down, even with those. So I see rewilding as a way of getting more of those core areas that can be chock full of wildlife. Let's get regenerative farming in the gaps in between and still producing food. And if that doesn't help reverse species decline, then it's game over, isn't it? So yeah, we want to, as Cornwall, just collaborate with landowners who are interested in doing this. Try and help them where we can. We're learning all the time, but also I'd like to see those landowners then getting some monetary benefits, maybe from the tourism industry. Can we shift Cornwall's tourism industry to be more about ecotourism and wildlife tourism, and get all those millions of visitors? Let's keep more of their money here, looking after what they're coming to see. That's what I'm excited about.
Can I come in, Carolyn?
Okay, any other anything?
Can I come in, Carolyn?
Merlin? Oh, sorry, Rob. Go
Just
for it.
on the, someone said there that people either like it or they don't. Well, attitudes are changing. You know, we cut the verges around Cornwall. I'm responsible for the verges generally, and then transport highways look after the junctions and vision. So they cut the junctions all the time. And we started giving instructions last year to reduce cutting the verges. It didn't work very well because the guys just thought it was convenient to leave the blades down as they went between. So I'm busy telling people, oh, we're not cutting so much. And the evidence was yes, we were. But this year with COVID, we haven't cut, and we've cut even less than we intended to reduce it by. And I've had very few complaints. You know, the only places that have complained have been the approaches to holiday towns, Newquay, Bodmin, Loo, who want it a bit tidier. So next year, okay, fair enough. We can afford to lose those little bits and make them tidy for them, and we'll cut the rest. Well, we won't cut the rest. We'll let it grow. So some of the wildflowers we seed haven't gone so well. So we'll learn a lesson and plant a few more. But if I'd done this 5 years ago, I'd have been inundated with complaints, and yet now very few. Just a few little areas, you know, that places like Newquay that like to be neat and tidy as they come in. The rest have taken it on board. And I think there was a really big article a really nice article in Cornwall Live about the St Austell Link Road, and they captioned it, "Look at the pretty flowers." But the wildflowers are wonderful. But it's not just flowers, is it? We're building Cornish hedges there as well to help it out. But we're going to move on from that to going around the edge of play areas and just let the edges go a little bit further and see how that goes. But I'm not finding that it's some like it and some don't. I think people recognise the value of it now. And we're
You've even had a compliment, Rob, in the chat box on the verges. Chris, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, from where I sit, the words are so important. Rewilding is a bloody awful phrase to use in an audience of farmers, and we've got to remember, farmers own the bloody environment, and we have to be absolutely front and center, or they have to be in front and center of all the negotiation, the complex societal kind of negotiation that goes along with this. And we will need to make big progress. We need to be somehow finding a nice sharp word that says rewilding, but in a different way. So because people, you know, farmers think, bloody George Monbiot, bloody wolves, bloody bears, bloody lions and tigers, and it scares them. And so we need to find a better language. What we need to be saying, I believe, is restoring ecological integrity. But that is very clunky. So how do we find a word that says that, but does it really, really nicely, that everyone can get their heads around? And the other thing, critically, is we have to change society's contract with farmers and landowners, because the way it is at the moment, there is very, very little incentive to do anything really joined up and meaningful. Thanks.
I can see lots of contributions in the chat box from Loveday and Louise Hitchens, other alternative words to rewilding, and language is really important, as is linking with our cultural heritage in Cornwall. Right, I've got a nice straightforward question that 2 or 3 people have asked. How do I find out where a tree has a tree preservation order? Maybe that's a question for Alan. Is that a question for you?
Yeah, if you go onto the Cornwall Council website and look at the intranet mapping pages, there's a planning page, and all of the tree preservation orders and conservation areas are all on there so that you can self-serve.
Great, so if you want to find out if a tree has a tree preservation order, go onto Cornwall Council and find the right page, maybe type it into the search box and you'll get there.
Yeah, it's intranet mapping you need, so I mean, that should be your first port of call. If there's any kind of discrepancy or you can't really read what you're seeing, then give the planning department a call, planning inquiries. Okay,
brilliant. Thank you for that. Another straightforward question, again, Alan, you might be best placed to take this, is what is Cornwall Council's policy for tree planting? And supplementing that question is some background that someone had heard that perhaps Cormac were being sent in to clear the land of scrub so that trees could be planted.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, go on.
I'm not a part of the Forest for Cornwall team, so I don't know the answer to that. Maybe Rob will know, or maybe even Matt. I see Matt Stroud is there, might be able to give you an answer. I mean, in terms of replanting, certainly through the planning system, we secure the planting of thousands of trees every year through good landscaping schemes and tree planting schemes.
Great,
thank you, Matt's probably the best place to answer the Forest for Cornwall question.
Yeah, let's go over to Matt then. Matt, if you could pick up those questions, that would be great.
Or I can, if
There you go.
Matt cannot hear us. It's Roxana. Hello, can you hear me?
Who's speaking? Sorry.
You go, Rox. That's right, you take this one.
Hello, I'm Roxana. Okay, so I already provided some answer in writing in the chat. Please take a look on our website under the frequently asked question. You will see our policies regarding planting new trees. Regarding Cormac, we will use them as well as other delivery mechanisms throughout the program. So this is no question, let's say. However, we do have very clear specifications, and all these planting specifications will be provided to all our contractors.
Great, thank you, Roxana. Matt, is there anything more you want to add from your experience in your role?
Yes, when we're advising with all our planting, it's all going to be to UK forestry standard. So if there's an issue around planting quality, we'll make sure we're giving guidance that heads towards this. So if there's any worries about issues with quality, we hope you've got that covered in the guidance we provide. So.
Okay, there's a number of questions that are about community, working with the community and working with schools.
You're breaking up, Caroline. I can't. You're breaking up. No, we can't hear the question.
Caroline, it might be worthwhile trying to turn your video off. It might help the audio.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Is that any better?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, Conor.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Great afternoon, and internet connection joy. The involvement of schools in the Forest for Cornwall and community groups. Roxana and Matt, if you could say anything about your plans to involve schools, and Cheryl, if you could then say something about our plans to work with schools and the leaflet.
Hello, can you hear me? It's Roxana again.
Yes, Roxana.
Yep.
Okay, so as Rob said at the beginning, the team is about to go full speed. So we were functioning in, let's say, restricted mode over the summer. Schools are definitely on our agenda, and they will. There is already a small idea project ongoing. One of my colleagues is managing that stream of work. She's also managing the communities, and we've recently launched, I mean, it's really fresh, 2 days ago, the Forest for Cornwall crowdfunding mechanisms, by which we will support projects coming from schools and community with up to £5,000 for planting trees. So again, I have included in the chat links towards the information about the crowdfunder. We also have put together guidance on how to start a project. It's on our webpage with a lot of information about free sources of trees, how to build woodland management plan, how to engage with your community and so on. So if this presentation is not really working due to connectivity issue, please try to get online on our website. We have posted a lot of fresh information about it.
Great, thank you, Roxana. Matt, is there anything more you want to add around that? Or are you more on the tree end of the project?
I'm more on the tree side of it, but we are also looking at getting a forest school list together. But as I say, this is all in this is all stuff we're working on, so it is being developed. But yeah, we are looking to develop it in the future.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And Richard, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just to say we're working with Roxana as part of the Forest for Cornwall, and getting the community involved is really, really key, and actually managing and establishing these woodlands if we're going to plant them. Because some of the areas that we're looking at setting aside are areas that are within the city centre, are heavily used as recreational spaces, and they need to have watchful eyes on them, people looking after them and managing them. So we're in consultation at the minute. Richard Argyle, our tree warden, is going to be helping us, and we're going to be forwarding letters to a community that we're looking to plant on some steep banks that we're unable to mow anymore. And plant that out. And obviously having young people and the community involved is a key, because that will hopefully give them a better chance to avoid any kind of vandalism in the future.
Brilliant, thanks Richard. Over to Cheryl, and then I'll pass over to Rob Nolan. So Cheryl.
Yeah, embarrassing, Carolyn, you probably know more about this one than I do, about the leaflet. Okay, well, shall I take that one then?
Please,
yeah, I'll chair you.
Okay, good work. So Cornwall Wildlife Trust has been working with the council and our various officers to develop a leaflet as the basis of a campaign to go out to community groups and schools to encourage the collection of tree seeds, acorns, all sorts of different tree seeds, native ones, ideally, that's what we're emphasising. And to give very basic instructions on to how to turn those seeds into saplings, how to look after them, and then to support people to plant them, ideally locally, or to give them to us where we work with so many landowners, and we've got all our nature reserves as well, that we've got homes for those saplings to go to. So you should expect to see some social media and press comms activity on that over the next 2 or 3 months, but it's a very basic guide aimed at everybody to collect seeds, create a sapling, put it in the ground in the right place, recognising that some trees get very big, so you might not want to put a big oak in your tiny front garden unless you're prepared for the pavement damage. But anyway, so that's happening over the next few weeks. Rob, over to you, Rob Nolan.
Thank you. I want to follow up on what Richard Budge said there. Consultation is really important. You can't just do trees or whatever to people. You have to engage with them, and they have to be part of the project. And we've had some green infrastructure for growth projects that you've probably come across. We had European money to go to deprived areas. It was council-owned land, so our estates, where we would have a bit of grass that we would go in and cut 8 times a year, and it was a bit of a sad place with nothing much going on it, a green desert, someone might call it. And we've gone in and installed and planted wildflowers. Sometimes we've cheated and put down the wildflower turf, planted them out, bug hotels, all this stuff, all with the cooperation of the community and engagement. And the workers there told me that in some of these areas, children were more likely to be able to recognize a Dalek than a wasp. But they were thoroughly engaged with it all, loving the bug hotels. A year later, they're all still in good condition, even though they're well used. People are out there and they love them. And I sat down there and had a cup of tea with some people, and it was great. We've done 29 of them now. We've got money for 30 more, spreading them out, and they're really good, and people like them. And I hope to see more of them. I'd like to do them in more places, but we've only got the money to do them in these few for the minute. But it's the way forward. Engage with people and tell them what you're doing and explain it, and they love it.
Great, thanks, Rob. Liam, I can see you've got your hand up. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to say that there's no doubt we've got to make changes to our culture, to the way we do things. We're going to be in trouble if we don't. And the best way to do that is through education and working together. So if you work with the community and you educate the community, if you work with kids and educate the kids, they come home, tell mum and dad about it, you're spreading the word. So there's nothing better than working with the community to get this moving, and it's got to move quite quickly.
Great, thank you, Liam. Right, there's another theming the questioning when I've just been skimming through, and it's pretty much summarised by the last question that's on the Q&A list, which is, what are your views on non-native species and particularly in light of climate change and rewilding? And Conor was up, his hand was up like a dart. There you go, you can get the first chance on that question, Conor.
Okay, so there's some big distinctions to make here, and that's between a non-native species that plugs on into the ecosystem, does its thing, helps everything get together, and actually is better suited now to a changing environment than some of our native species would have been. And then you've got the noxious ones, or the invasive ones. You know, this is idea of invasion, overtaking things, creating a environmental cascade and sort of defabricating the ecosystem that it's in. Now, those are two very important different things. I do a lot of designing for farmers, for incorporating ecological principles into the way they're farming. I'm getting farmers to buy sweet chestnuts and walnuts all the time. Neither of those are native. Both of them will make farmers rich in about 20 years' time. So farmers love it. The timber quality of both is really good, and you know, they're both going to adapt to the climate fantastically. You know, we plant annual crops, virtually none of which are native, every single year. So maybe we need to, you know, look at some non-natives and think, okay, they are useful. They perform almost exactly the same functions that many of our native plants do as well. Where this debate really starts to take root is how we look at wild areas, how we look at land that we don't want to actively manage. But when we step back, we see a myriad of non-native species, be it animals, be it plants, dominating the entire system. And that's a much more difficult question, because you have to work out whether it's worth us going in and actively managing to try and recreate something that we know was there before we introduced all these species, or whether it's better to just step back and say, hey, what will be, will be. This is costing us millions and millions and millions of pounds per year, and maybe it isn't worth the ecosystem services that we get back from it. So that's where I think the real debate lies, is when these noxious plants go way out into the wild communities. And I think there's a need to manage invasive species, but I think a lot of the ones we're managing, we're spending a lot of money and time on, where the battle might already have been lost. I'm sure they've probably got opinions on this as well. So.
I'm sure they have. I'm sure they have. So Liam had his hand up for a while, and then I'll come to Alan after Liam.
Yeah, I mean, I've read loads of studies about this sort of thing, and read information that comes forward, and they always prompt that we should go on the side of indigenous, because indigenous things are for our indigenous creatures. But when you come into the garden, which is the area I was talking about, bees aren't worried if a salvia comes from Mexico or from Cambourne. It's not worried. You know, we've got to introduce these things, and we've got to encourage the wildlife into the garden from what I was talking about. But also, I think I agree totally with what Conor said. But I think as we go along making these changes, we've got to review them, because we're fiddling around again trying to bring nature back. But we've got to review what we do and see the impact that we're making.
Okay, thanks, Liam. Alan, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I agree with what Liam said. I think what's arguably more important is, where are we getting our trees from that we're going to be planting? I mean, we're talking about, you know, millions and millions and millions of trees. UK nurseries are not going to be able to supply that. Even if we start up new nurseries now, there's going to be a 2 or 3 year time lag before they can supply the trees we need. So if we're talking about importing trees, and there's the whole issue of the carbon footprint, importing pests and diseases. So I think there are some significant fundamental flaws in this rush to plant millions and millions of trees. I think if we end up bringing them all from Europe with all the pests and diseases that entails, and putting those trees in the ground, I think we could be undoing what we're trying to achieve. So I think it's as important, at least, as species selection.
I can see lots of nodding to everything most people are saying, which seems to indicate a lot of agreement. And in the chat box, I'm seeing references to lynx, pine martens to control grey squirrels. Chris Jones, that might be a good time to bring you in.
Thanks. Completely agree with pine martens to control grey squirrels. In fact, I think the idea of planting 8,000 hectares equivalent of new trees in Cornwall without pine martens is a waste of bloody time and money. Grey squirrels will absolutely knacker broadleaf woodland. They really are a menace. And pine martens will, to a great degree, for very little cost, help with that. I was just going to say about the non-native native thing. I concur that a lot of these things are here and they're here to stay. Japanese knotweed, it's a hell of a problem, but actually it's an extremely useful plant. It has a really nutritious pith when it's a younger plant. It produces extremely good fiber. Rather than just sort of bemoaning the fact that we've got Japanese knotweed, shouldn't we just use the bloody stuff? You know, there are things we can do which are just not, it's not all about fighting some organism to the death. We should maybe think a bit more broadly, a bit more laterally about how we go on with them. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Anyone else want to make any further comment on this subject? Rob, Nolan.
I was coming on the my front garden. I get a good spread of bluebells that I was always very pleased with in the spring, and then until someone told me, oh no, they're Spanish bluebells, they're no good. But the insects and stuff seem to flutter about them cheerfully. But I am very concerned about us importing trees from abroad. Do you remember we planted some trees in Poole there a while back? Some Italian trees we got from somewhere at great expense, and they all died. So we have to be really careful about, you know, whether they're going to be hardy enough to survive in Cornwall, and we don't want to bring in any disease. But there is an issue. There is an issue about how many trees there are. As I said earlier on, councils are rushing into this. It's going to take longer, but it's a long-term project. So unusually for a politician, I'll just say, yeah, great. Long-term project, we just have to take it slowly and do it as they're available, rather than, you know, I'd be really unhappy about rushing off and buying a lot of foreign trees, you know, from Holland or wherever. Let's go with as much native stuff. Let's do as much as we can here in the UK, at least, if not Cornwall.
Thanks, Rob. Chris Bird.
Yeah, well, my bees hate me because I'm not a purist on these, and I go around and pull up all the Himalayan balsam, and we have teams of volunteers from Wildlife Trust and South West Lakes helping us pull up the Himalayan balsam, even though my bees love it. So I'm not a purist on this, but I think there's a certain amount of xenophobia that often underlies discussions about native and non-native, and we should be aware of that and try and get away from that. In terms of not importing trees for planting and mass planting, absolutely, that's correct. But we shouldn't underestimate how quickly we could turn things around and manage to produce all of the saplings that we might need. It can be done. You know, there's examples around the world where they've managed to produce billions of seedlings in very short spaces of times, and that's what we should be doing in this country, changing over areas for the quick production of seedlings, and so that we are producing our own seedlings that don't have to be indigenous plants.
Thank you, Chris. Richard, you've got your hand up.
Just to come on the fact of indigenous and native, etc. I mean, I think it's really important to maintain pockets of native areas, and that's something that we're looking to do very much where we are in Truro, and trying to keep things as native as possible. Because I think the fact is, as humans, we've destroyed our own land massively. We've undone ourselves in the way that we carry on and the way that we import things. And interesting to hear Chris is a beekeeper, and I'm a beekeeper too also. And on the Brother Adam on the search for the most wonderful bee, brought various things across, and I think we brought diseases across, Varroa and things, and we've caused our own pollination a huge amount of distress. I mean, I've seen bumblebees flying around and with Varroa mites on their backs, so that has obviously gone across. And in Africa, where the Varroa mite came from, the bees have adapted and they're able to brush off their Varroa mite, and it's not such a problem, but it's different here. So I think it's important to keep as native areas as we can, but also we need to be really considering the fact is that I've noticed this year ash dieback is really kicking in. Have you seen the amount of defoliation in the last few weeks of the ash trees? And some of the ash trees are extremely strong and it's still in full leaf. So we are going to have a huge amount of replanting that we're going to have to do as a race over the next 20 years, because they reckon in 20 years that we may not have an ash tree left. It is really frightening. We've gone through Phytophthora. We've now got ash dieback. We had Dutch elm disease, and a lot of that, I think, is through us as human beings transporting things all over the world, and that started with the Victorians bringing back plants, etc. So I think we need to start saving our own planet ourselves also.
Any further comments on this subject? Otherwise, I'm going to change us on to a slightly different topic that's come up in the questions as well. And I'll just say this question and see who puts their hands up the quickest. Is net gain a license to trash? Question mark. Ian, good. There we go. Ian's going to have a go at answering this one. Oh, you're on mute, Ian.
Thank you very much. Apologies, I've never done this before.
Sorry.
Yes, I feel very strongly about this. You can hear me all right, I presume now?
Yeah.
So first of all, two forms of net gain, net biodiversity gain, net environmental gain. Biodiversity is part of the environment. It doesn't really make environmental science sense to talk about net biodiversity gain separate from net environmental gain. So I'd always say we should be looking at net environmental gain. Now, I think that if it's correctly designed, then net gain principles could be a massive source of funding for improvement of the environment. So in principle, I'm not against it. In fact, in principle, I think this is something that could really improve things. But if it's not carefully designed, then yes, I think it will trash the environment. And I'm concerned that the direction we're going feels a lot more like the latter than the former. So a few things that I think have to be, I think there's 4 principles that I'd suggest. One is don't allow net gain to allow destruction of conservation priorities. This is not an approach that says you can't have development, but it does say where you've got resources that are absolutely crucial, particularly to survival of species, then we just shouldn't allow that destruction. So, you know, there's been some high-profile cases of the destruction of some of the few remaining habitats of some species. I don't think you should allow that on the back of just saying, well, there's going to be compensation. Secondly, if this is compensation and who are we compensating? If it really is for biodiversity as opposed to people, then I think the very popular idea of keeping net gain local is a massive mistake, because what you're talking about there is most of the construction that is going on in this country is actually often city edge areas. If you destroy an area, because that's what you are doing, then saying, well, we're going to restore an area next door to it is probably not going to be the best thing for biodiversity. There's many places in this country which would really benefit from, in particular, sort of network approach to biodiversity. Trying to, for example, fill in gaps so that species can actually move and we can connect conservation areas together. That will give much more bang for your buck than just putting something next to a building site, basically. So the third one, 34, local compensation also, when it's actually put in practice, almost always means compensation for winners. So you get a greenfield site which was probably being used by, particularly if it's a city edge, by a population on that city edge. You turn it into, let's be a polemic, executive homes, and you put the compensation area at the back of the gardens of the most expensive homes. I've seen this happen again and again. If you actually look at the maps, that's what is actually done. Those people that are the losers are those that used to use that area that is now under those executive homes. So you're compensating the winners, not the losers. And then the final thing is, because most builders want to build in rich areas for good reasons, you know, that they want to make the most money, and you know, fair enough. If you keep this compensation local, you will never take people out of the very poor environments that a lot of people in this country live in. So that's 4 principles that I think you'd have to apply to net gain to make sure that it wasn't trashing the environment and it was delivering what it can deliver in this country.
Does anyone else want to come in on that? Rob, Nolan in particular, the Cornwall Council mandated net gain back in March as part of the planning system. So any development over 10 houses has to demonstrate at least 10% net gain, ideally on site, but potentially off site. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, and when we give permission for development and they say there's lots of lovely trees in the gardens and everything, then as soon as the trees grow and start cast a bit of shadow on the people's kitchen windows, they cut them down. So by which time we've moved on. Yeah, I'm probably the least well qualified really to answer this. Is net gain. To me, the council's going to get involved in this. Cornwall Council's doing more than most councils with the financial pressures we've got. I think there are quite a few people in the council would like to say, well, yeah, let's just not do any more of this stuff. Let's walk away and spend the money on other things, because the money that we haven't got on other things. But there's a real commitment, you know, to the verges, to the Forest for Cornwall, to all these projects, to making things greener. We're working on Langarth, where we're going to build 3,500 houses, which is a massive project in Cornish standards. But we're going to try and do it in a green way. Whether we'll achieve is something else. The link road from St Austell to the A30 has a net gain, and that's achieved by building a Cornish hedge all the way down there, buying some of the land next to it and returning it to more land to attach in, having cycle paths there, and then we claim that people aren't driving through the villages there, so there's a carbon saving and a pollution saving for them. But it's you know, I think it's the right approach to weigh that in, rather than just slap a road down the way we used to and not make any real effort to worry about the environment as we do it. So it's a much better approach, I think. Time will tell whether we're doing it properly, but there's a commitment in the council to try and have a net gain. See, I hope it works.
Okay, Cheryl, do you want to pick up on that?
Thank you. Just quickly, yeah, I think Cornwall Council's done a really good job on getting net gain set up, because we're doing it in Cornwall already, ahead of a lot of the rest of the country. So I think Council's done a good job in their bit. The metric that Natural England has come up with, it's basically a spreadsheet from hell that consultant puts in everything that's going to be lost on a site and gives weightings to it, and then you have to put in everything you're going to create and see what the computer says. So it's a classic case of if you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. So it will depend, I think, on the quality of the environmental consultants that fill it out, and having a very good level of scrutiny for how consultants are using it, because not all environmental consultants are the same, and not all developers are the same. So it's weighted so that if you've got existing high quality habitat, you would have to do a huge amount to get net gain. So it's got that hierarchy. It's set up so there isn't a license to trash, but it's now going to be about the detail of how it's used, and we've got to scrutinise it and make sure it's used in the right way.
Great, thanks, Cheryl. Steve, Davey, let's go to you. I think you're still on mute. Let me see if I can unmute.
I've done it. Okay. I've done it, I think. Yeah, I've done it. Thank you. Yeah, question for Rob. I mean, I'm not up with planning rules and regulations, but when you talk about net gain, what is the time frame for that net gain? Are you talking years and years and years, or is it something that has to have quite a quick impact? I mean, at what point do you accept net gain? What time frame?
Cheryl, I think you might have a bit of the detail here if you want to answer.
It's calculated for a 30-year period.
Right.
Which adds a whole level of complexity, because a lot of consultants are just used to talking about, you know, bats and badgers and all that kind of thing, not longer term habitat management. So there's a lot of learning to be done if it's going to be. And I looked at one a week or so ago, and some of the claims that the consultants were making were ridiculous, I thought. So yeah, it's going to need a lot of input and a lot of scrutiny. It is a long-term thing.
Well, I think it's we say, all right, 30 years, but if you build it properly in the first place, you know, if we set out that link road from St Austell, if we set that out with the Cornish hedges and things there, then we're in the right direction from the start, aren't we? With a big development like Langarth, that's much harder, and it's going to take absolute vigilance to make sure that that the initial plan turns into reality, and that we don't just think, oh, someone doesn't come along and say, oh, well, look, let's just build another few hundred houses here, we'll make a bit more money. Getting it right at the start, although 30 years seems like a long time, getting it right at the start is important, isn't it? Making sure that if we're going to plant trees on a development, they're not in a place where people are going to come along and cut them down as soon as they live there.
Thanks, Rob. I mean, we often say do the green bits first when you're looking at a development, and don't clear the site before you start putting your hey-ho. Left on this Q&A. Does anyone want to add anything about biodiversity net gain before we move on from net gain? I can't see any hands up. Right, okay. Another question then that's come up a few times. Will natural capital just favour profit? And Ian, I can see you smiling, so I might come to you first on this one.
I'll unmute from the start this time, just for a change. So I actually think that, well, first of all, we have to recognise that profit is what's determined land use for, well, how long? Decades? Centuries? Not sure. And what this approach, let's call it natural capital, you can call it just recognising the multiple effects of land use change. What it's trying to do is to say that market prices and profits aren't the only thing that you get from land use, and to try and bring that recognition into a decision-making system. That's really all it's attempting to do. It's trying to say that these non-market benefits can be very, very valuable. So it almost by definition must be moving things in the right way, because it still recognises all of the market benefits. Okay, so at the moment, land use is basically determined by market benefits and not really much else. A few regulations, that sort of stuff. This is saying there's some other benefits as well that should be kicked out. So it has to be moving it in the right direction. Okay. That said, any system which says we ought to ignore the, let's use the word, profit that comes off land, I think is wasting its time. It's just living in a fantasy land. That those profits, as people call it, I'm surrounded by farmers. I've lived in farming areas all my life. Most of them are very, very decent people who run old cars and have debts and have to look after their families and themselves. You know, not all farmers are out there driving around in top of the end Range Rovers at all. So I think if you don't recognise that you have to incentivise change, then you're not really going to be affecting the large areas of land that we do have to change. It's fine if you want to just talk to those people who have land and don't really need to get benefits off it. Okay, that's fine. But that's such a small area of land in this country. And as a number of speakers today have pointed out, the level of change that we need to alter our economy and environment onto a sustainable path is huge. It's absolutely huge. I think it was Cheryl who put up that fantastic pie chart, and she was saying, look, you could get up to 1/3 of change from these methods. That's still 2/3 that we need to address. So we've got to be living in the real world. There's a polemic approach to this and a pragmatic approach to this. I actually, and there's a lot of people argue about, oh, you know, you shouldn't go down this pragmatic natural capital approach. You should be purist and all this sort of stuff. I actually think we need polemic plus pragmatism. We do need people standing up and shouting about the situation we need. But if that's the only approach you've got, I don't think you're going to win. So I'm saying we need polemic appeal backed up by pragmatism, things like incentives and regulations, and those should be aimed towards the benefits that public money should be providing, not simple things like per hectare, everybody gets the same, irrespective of what they do. That's a total waste of money. But don't just think that by haranguing people that get their livelihood off the land, you can get change, because they can't afford it. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Ian. Chris Bird, I wondered if you wanted to add anything more to that. I know you're also a landowner, taking decisions every day about what to do with your land. So is there anything more you would have to say on it?
There is, I'm sure, but I was busy typing a reply to him and not totally listening to what he was actually saying. Yeah, I mean, I think part of the problem about the whole natural capital thing is that it's lovely and it works on paper, but the people in society who really make the decisions and who really have the power benefit from that short-term profit. And that's, you know, and they're the ones making the decisions at the moment. And I just said in the chat about we really need something like a citizens panel. And I've got my Extinction Rebellion hat on now. We really need something like a citizens panel that reflects the interests of all in society to start tackling these problems, not just the, you know, the powerful elite that benefit from the way things are.
Thank you, Chris. Any other landowners want to carry on that theme or challenge that theme? Merlin?
Not challenge it, I wouldn't dare. But I certainly agree with Ian's point. You know, I was reading recently the average age of farmers in the UK is I think approaching 62 years old now. It's got the second highest rate of suicide of any industry. And there was a fascinating report that came out recently about Darmoor hill farms, which is very similar to the farm we have here, that the average upland hill farm on moorland areas takes 91% of its income from subsidies, predominantly from the Common Agricultural Policy and the Basic Payment Scheme. So, we know that that's winding down between now and 2027. We know that 91% of the income of a lot of these small and mid-sized farms is disappearing. And whilst I really hope that the Chancellor decides that the British agricultural policy will be as generous as the European one, I think it's highly, highly unlikely. So, we will need to think of ways to support small and mid-sized farmers and landowners whose main source of income at the moment, and it's not right that it's a subsidy system, but who often their main source of income is about to disappear progressively over the next 6 or 7 years, and that'll become very difficult for a lot of people.
Could I just come? Oh, sorry.
Great, thank you, Merlin.
Let's go to Chris.
Yeah, Chris Jones.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I'm sure I said it once before already, but it's a critical thing. We have a contract between society and landowner stroke farmers. And we need to re-engineer that contract in a way that actually means something, as if we meant as a society to do our best to ensure there is a future. And if we don't, we deserve to be bloody extinct. Now, currently the government is working on this. I have to say, not doing a fabulous job of it. It looks like they're going to produce a slightly shitter version of farm stewardship, or whatever you want to call it. We need to be asking our government through DEFRA to be getting this into a much more easily understood and critically a systemic way of farming better for everything. I mean, rewilding is lovely, but as has been pointed out, can only really work in small areas as things stand now. We need better across the piece, not necessarily herds of bison and wolves and bears, but we need better across the piece, or otherwise we is stuffed. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. Ian, over to you. You were going to...
Yeah, well, first of all, can I just say I've agreed with everything that both of the Chris's have said all day. So, sorry, all three Chris's. Sorry. I just wanted to reply to Merlin and just actually totally endorse what he's saying as well. I did some work for DEFRA in the run-up to formulating the agriculture bill, especially the first version of it, the better version in my view. And there is enough money in the current payments to, if we redistribute it, to lift huge numbers of farmers out of poverty. And really what Merlin is describing is poverty, really, because anybody who relies 90% on the state for their income needs support, okay? But there is enough money to provide that support and to fund public money for public goods. So to actually provide a safety net for farmers that we don't want to see go to the wall, and to pay for public money for public goods, but there isn't enough money to pay for those two things, plus flat rate payments to massive prairie farms, especially where I used to work over on the east, where you're seeing people who are farming in a highly intensive way, receiving just the same amount of money per hectare as the Chris's of the world are doing, and producing no public benefits at all. I lived in the middle of an agricultural wilderness in the middle of Norfolk. If I wanted, there wasn't there was 6 houses where I lived. If I wanted to go for a walk, I'd either got to walk on the road or get into a car, because there's nowhere to walk around there at all. And yet, just like all of us, I was paying my taxes towards supporting that system. That we can't carry on with that, but there is enough funding properly allocated to actually make sure that I don't know what Merlin's situation is, but say those Dartmoor farmers can can survive, and we can have much, much better public goods, all at the same amount of money that we've got at the moment. My fear is that Chris Jones is right, and this won't, the government will not hold its nerve on this.
Merlin.
Sorry, just a short rejoinder that of course I agree in, but you know, that would all be so in a non-COVID world. I think that you know, the massive shock that the economy has taken over the last 6 months, unfortunately, now that we are losing the influence of the French and German farmers who are able to hold their governments to ransom with blockades and burning tires on the roads, it's very unlikely that when the NHS or social care or education, all these vital things that actually are so important to our society, start to struggle financially, it would be a very brave chancellor who keeps pumping money towards the very, very small number of generally fairly aging farmers. No offense, Chris or Chris.
But he shouldn't be thinking that. He should be thinking this is an investment which will pay off massively in terms of the benefits that it will generate to the UK public.
Yeah, it's a long-term investment, and politicians only think in the short term. We know this.
I agree.
Right, okay, thank you. We've got 5 minutes left, and I'm going to go to another question that's come up, and I'm going to try and get each. So let's try and hear from everyone. So how can Cornwall be more self-sufficient? Did everyone hear the question? How can Cornwall be more self-sufficient in terms of food production? Because we're going to try and get you all to say something. So never knowingly lost for words, I'm going to ask Rob Nolan to go first.
I'd rather answer a different question. I've been looking at the things in the about planning, and planning is about to get a lot easier for developers. All the obstacles are being taken away. There's a planning consultation going on right now. Cornwall has to build 2,500 houses a year. It's going up to about 4,000 under the new proposals from the government, and all these things that we'd like to see aren't going to happen. So we're going to have more houses. I don't know if Cornwall could ever become self-sufficient on food. I know that we're doing well on energy. You know, we're now producing 39% of our own power from renewables, compared with 6% in 2009. That's a really good thing as far as I'm concerned. Like, I hope we'll do more of that. But,
okay, great, thanks Rob. So we can learn from the energy sector. Let's go to Chris Waddle. What do you think about self-sufficient food production?
Well, I'm definitely in the minority here. As a vegan, I could have a long discussion with quite a few of the farmers on here. So I think I best pass that one on for now. But, you know, it was really interesting listening to the first talk by Conor with the agroforestry. And I would probably get in touch with him, actually. And it's something that I'd be very interested in, with growing food in woodlands. So, yeah.
Great, thanks, Chris. And let's go straight to Conor then. Self-sufficiency in food production.
Cheers, Chris. That's wicked. I'll come and see you at some point. That'd be good. This is probably the best question you could have asked. Is the most important thing that we need to do is focus on supplying our own needs. So the number one thing is get more people working on the land. The Ecological Land Cooperative published a document called Small is Successful. Go and read that. The smaller you make the farm, the more intensive you make the production, the more a person runs back and forth over that land, the more you get out per acre. Expanding on that slightly, we need to be doing more home gardening. We need to be doing more urban and peri-urban agriculture. And we need to get our farmers working on multiple cropping systems within one field. If we do that, we're going to be in a glut in no time. So that's going to be an exciting 50 years or so. But we need to start now, like tomorrow. So off we go.
Great, thanks, Conor. Conor's got the answers there. That's good. Merlin, what's your take on this?
Thanks, Conor. So I know I've been talking lots in the latter parts, but to back up exactly what Conor and Chris Waddle have been saying, yeah, everybody, as soon as you say as a farmer that you're going to a more rewilding or restorative agriculture system, you'll always find a Luddite who'll say, oh, but how will we feed ourselves? And it's impossible. And there are three things that for me are so fundamental as that. The first is food waste. I've read that we waste up to 2/3 of the food that is purchased in this country. The second is calorie needs. We have a massive obesity problem. So, if we were all eating what we should be eating and eating sensibly, and we're better educated about food, then perhaps that could be redistributed a bit better. And the third one, which Chris makes the point of, is changing eating behaviors. The certain generations would think it perfectly normal to eat meat twice or even 3 times a day. My parents think it's weird if you don't have meat at a meal. 10 years ago, vegetarians were considered strange. 5 years ago, 5 years ago, vegans were considered strange. Now you can't move for them. People are changing their eating habits. And as we eat less meat and realize that it's more natural to eat meat maybe once a week or once a fortnight rather than every day, suddenly land becomes a lot more productive because we're not having to feed cows.
Thank you, Merlin. And I should say for Christine Marsh, this was her question, and others have raised similar questions, but thank you, Christine, for bringing this question. You've brought the conversation up a notch. Right, I'm going to go to Jeanette Cookham. Would you like to say anything about food production in Cornwall? Up to you.
Yeah, I just think growing your own, and it would be nice to have more allotments, and if everybody grows a little bit and sharing it around the community.
Brilliant.
You don't have or produce.
Great, thank you. Good to hear from you. And Richard Argle? You're on mute, Richard. Let me see if I can unmute you. I should be able to. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just sorry to come in on this so late as Truro tree warden, but just quickly, we're very lucky in Truro that we've got quite a lot of areas of what I call public realm, public access, and there's no reason why quite a lot of these couldn't be planted with food or food-producing trees. We've been doing this for quite a few years now. Walnuts, sweet chestnuts, some of the interesting non-native hawthorns which produce larger fruits can also be utilised. Things like medlar are also good, quince. And we've got a community orchard up behind New County Hall, which is, as I say, it's publicly accessible. So yeah, I mean, it's not going to feed the county, but any little thing that can be used in, especially in this publicly accessible area, should be exploited, and we can make use of these. And we need to know which things are edible. For example, I've got Chilean guava planted up at the Crown Court exotic bed, which is full of other mainly ornamental agaves and all the rest of it. But I made some fantastic Chilean guava, sorry, Agni Malaysia, I think it's called, jelly last year. Excellent stuff, really tasty. And I think there's so many more things that we can make use of around us that are already there. And yeah, build on that publicly accessible land where anyone can access food sources. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. And I'm going to give the final word on food production and self-sustainability to Liam Shoesmith before I hand back to Lindsay and Sue to close.
Thanks for that. I think the answer for Cornwall making itself self-sustaining and for a lot of the things that's been mentioned today is education and culture change, and that's what we've got to head for to grow our wildlife, to grow our food, for us to live. And we've got to understand that all the things we've been talking about within trees, about rewilding and everything else, it's a balance, and we're part of that balance, and we're tipping the balance too far one way. So yeah, for me, it's education and culture change.
Brilliant, thank you. If Richard and Steve have one word or 2 words to summarise your comments, because I know Lindsay and Sue are keen to finish on time.
Yeah,
Richard?
sorry, it's a bit difficult to try to summarise it in just a few words, but basically just to say, I think if there's one good thing that's come out of this COVID pandemic, is people have started growing again. There's been a huge drive of people having time in their own gardens and wondering what to do with it, whether that's just a window box with a few carrots in, or whether they've actually turned over their lawn and turned it into a vegetable garden. So I think that is one major thing to help us go forward. And like Liam says, education. We manage allotments. There's a huge waiting list a few years ago. That's dropped massively. I'm expecting that to rise also. But one last thing, I mean, obviously it's not farming related, or the event wasn't about farming. It's been quite well covered today. I'm an ex-farmer's son from the Bodmin Moor, not too far from Merlin, the other side. And basically, my concern is talking about the ageing population of 62. Our family farm was sold off because we saw no future in it. If I went to the bank and tried to borrow £3.5 million, they'd laugh at me, because who's going to take on these farms as these older generations die off? Because people have moved out of farming, and I can see a full circle that people will be producing more food on 4 or 5 acres like they did many, many years ago, because they're not going to afford to buy the land. That's my initial
Thank you, Richard. And Steve, really quick final word, otherwise Lucy are going to sack me.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, no, there is a very, very simple answer. I've just put 7,500 polytunnels in your Amazon account, and replay the series of The Good Life, basically. Replace the news.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. So thank you to everyone who submitted a question. I'm sorry we didn't get to answer all of them, but that's how these things go. Thank you to all the panellists for answering questions as well. And yeah, thank you for your engagement. I'm going to pass back to Lindsay now.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, for chairing that. That was really good, and thank you to all the panellists, and thank you to everybody who asked questions. And I think that was no mean feat, chairing that. I actually think it was probably more difficult than a council meeting, so thank you.